Okay, so we're going to start with the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system, which is the neuron. Neurons help your body's nervous system transmit information rapidly in the form of electrochemical impulses. They are highly specialized and they do not multiply, which is something interesting to keep in mind. Neurogenesis is the process of the generation of neurons, and it takes place mostly during embryonic development. But recent studies also show that it occurs in certain brain regions throughout adulthood, which is very interesting. While the endocrine system typically uses chemical signals in the blood to communicate with the target tissue, the nervous system uses its own network of different neurons throughout the body. Different types of glial cells also help neurons transmit information throughout the body. Glial cells are sort of like the support system for neurons. There are a couple of different types, and we'll definitely go over them. They do differ a little bit between the central and peripheral nervous system. But a lot of this lecture is just going to be straight content. Obviously, the nervous system is huge and there's a lot to cover, so it's kind of hard to condense everything into 2 hours. So just keep in mind that this is a review. We're just touching upon some of the basic points, but you should definitely go more in depth with your independent studies. All right, so let's take a closer look at the multipolar neuron. So the neuron pictured to the left is called a multipolar neuron. It's the most common neuron in the central nervous system of humans, and it's probably the one that you're going to see the most. If they ever give you a diagram, like on the MCAT, and they ask you to examine it, you're most likely going to see this one. I'm sure you guys are all familiar from your undergrad studies and high school studies. So let's just go over the anatomy of it. So the dendrites are over to the left, the little projections that are coming off of the cell body. Those receive chemical information from other neurons. That's the input. They receive input there, and then action potentials are generated, which we'll get into a little bit later, and it propagates down the axon. But first, it has to pass the soma, which is the cell body. So like I said before, just keep in mind that the neuron, even though it's so different from other cells in your body, it still is a cell. It's the basic form of life, so it carries on all the metabolism of every other cell in your body. They are eukaryotic cells, and the body contains almost all of the same structures as other eukaryotic cells in your body. The axon carries information in the form of electrical impulses away from the soma to the axon terminal. And the axon of a single neuron can actually get really long. I think I put it in the slide somewhere later, but the longest axon in the human body is actually, it's up to 1 meter long, which is about 3 feet for those on the standard system. But it actually innervates your sciatic nerve, and it goes from your lumbar to the bottom of your foot. So I thought that was really cool that a single cell was like 3 feet long. The myelin sheath is an insulating layer of tissues formed by the oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system and the Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system. So these are 2 of the glial cells that I was talking about before. They're support cells. They don't transmit information like neurons do, but they are essential for the nervous system. They insulate the axon, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them later. The axon terminal, which is also known as the synaptic terminal, it's known as the synaptic bouton. There's a bunch of different names. You should be familiar with all of them. I'm sure you've seen most of them. And what that does is it converts the electrical impulses received by the axon into chemical signals. So that releases the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. It diffuses across the cleft, and then it touches the postsynaptic neuron. And I did, right at the bottom. The longest axon found in a human neuron is about 1 meter long, about 3.2 feet. I'm going to try to keep a pretty quick pace. So I'll try to stop at the end of each section if you have any questions. Does anybody have any questions so far? I know I'm talking kind of quickly. I just want to make sure I get through everything today. No? Okay. Remember, you can use the chat box. If I ever stop like this, you can also unmute your mic if you want to speak, if that's easier for you as well. Okay, so the 4 types of human neurons that you may encounter on the MCAT, the neurons vary in structure, but all neurons share the same general function. They transmit electrical signals throughout the body. The most common neuron that's found in the human nervous system, like we just spoke about, is the multipolar neuron. But if you take a look at these over here, we have unipolar, which just has a cell body with no dendrites coming out of it. A bipolar neuron, you can see the cell bodies in the middle, and it has two axons. They're myelinated. The pseudo-unipolar one has a cell body that's coming off of the axon, and the multipolar one is the one that we've already studied with dendrites coming out of the cell body. So you can see how they have similar structure. It's not really super necessary that you understand what each individual one does, but I just wanted to put it on this slide for, for a reference point. You should at least be familiar with the fact that there are different neurons and they do serve different purposes. But like I said, multipolar neurons are the ones that you're going to be seeing mostly.